Conversations across time, 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 conversations across.
Good evening. Welcome to part 2 of a series that we are doing here at Conversations Across Time on the Supreme Court. We are talking about the Supreme Court. Now, last week we talked about the fact that there seems to be no ethical oversight. Tonight we will be discussing the notion that today the former president noticed the public that he has received a target letter. And so, Irv, I want to introduce our panels. So we have back with us Irv Madnick, who's the CAT legal expert. You want to?
If you want me to, I'll explain what a target letter means.
And I want to introduce the other panel members so that everyone knows who's here with us. So we have Justice Antonin Scalia.
Hello, I am Antonin Scalia. From 1986 to my passing in 2016, I was an associate justice on the Supreme Court, and I was one of the most influential conservatives on the court. And I could be cast as an originalist because I always believed in sticking with the original text of the Constitution. No interpretations or historical analysis, just the original words on the Constitution.
And our next returning guest is Justice Thurgood Marshall.
I am Thurgood Marshall, standing for justice and equality, equal, that is not separate. I was appointed in 1965 and served until 1991 and was a champion of civil rights.
And our next returning guest is Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes.
Yes, I'm Oliver Wendell Holmes. I was appointed by a Republican president, Theodore Roosevelt. I'm most noted for my decision that involved a speech, free speech and First Amendment rights, and I coined the phrase clear and present danger, which basically means that if speech incites things that would be dangerous to the well-being of the public or the country, it is not free speech. It violates it. First Amendment does not protect that. I think that's going to be very relevant for the discussion we're going to have now.
So,
Okay.
Irv?
Okay. Let me first explain what a target letter means. Having practiced criminal defense law for a long time and representing members of groups that would get a target letter is sent by a federal prosecutor to somebody to inform them that they are being targeted for indictment for a particular crime. Not that they're an interesting person or whatever, a witness, but they're being targeted. And they state a date for them to come into the grand jury, and they do that so they hope they can give them an opportunity to come in and discuss their crime, that they didn't commit the crime or whatever their excuses are. And they have that opportunity to come in and do it. Very, very, very rarely does somebody who receives a target letter go to the grand jury. And if they are taken to, or they do, or presented to the grand jury, 99 times out of 100, they'll take their Fifth Amendment rights, which means they don't have to testify against themselves and really not present any information. Every once in a while, they will come to offer a proffer. What that means is they're offering the prosecutor something that he needs to prosecute somebody maybe in a higher position. Well, in this case, there's nobody higher than the President of the United States.
He's the guy.
He's the guy, and they're not going to give him a proffer. They might say to him, okay, listen, if you want to come in and you want to admit these things, we'll tell the judge that you were cooperating, and hopefully you'll get a lighter sentence. But that's not going to happen either in this case. So, but what that means, the target letter, is that he has been targeted, and he's going to be indicted for those events of January 6th. Now, which events and what the crimes are specifically haven't been, they've been determined by the prosecutor, but they haven't been made public. But we suspect that, number one, he's going to be indicted for the conspiracy to overturn the election, which is going to involve all of these fake electors that were set up in all of those targeted states, where they were going to take the place of the regular electors and say that Trump really won the state when he didn't. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect is he personally called the Secretary of State, and the third and maybe the most important aspect of it is that they're going to charge him with inciting an insurrection. And everybody knows what happened on January 6th when the crowd stormed the Capitol after a speech that was made, a fiery speech that was made by the president, past president, although he was the president at the time, telling them to fight like hell, or else we're not going to have.
And then he said, "We're going to go to the Capitol. I'll be with you."
He said, "We're going to storm the Capitol, and I'm going to be with you." He didn't say storm the Capitol. "We're going to march to the Capitol, and I'll be with you, and we'll make sure that Pence," and this is another aspect of it, he tried to convince Pence, who was the vice president and the one who ordinarily would declare the election, the electors legal, take the vote in the Congress, which was scheduled for that day, that Pence could, if he wanted to, and if he was part of their team, he wouldn't do that and allow these fake electors to come in, and then Trump would be appointed president. Hardly the Democratic with a large D way. So, I mean, there was a constitutional crisis that he was starting, and inciting these people to do what they did, and eventually 5 people died as a result of this insurrection that day. It was all televised. Everybody saw what happened. And he, President Trump, just sat there and watched it and did nothing during the course of this insurrection to prevent it from going further. He didn't call for the National Guard. He just watched it and enjoyed everything he was seeing, apparently. Now, the key issue here, and to whether or not he's going to be guilty of this, he has to be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a very, very strict,
High standard, high burden of proof.
Absolutely. Everybody has to agree to it. There can't be any doubt whatsoever. They have to prove that he knew he lost the election, that he did this even though he knew the election, by the way, was not fake, that there wasn't a lot of, as a matter of fact, he took 60 different cases to try and charge fraud in the election, and every single one of them was overturned. He was told by all of his people, the Attorney General Barr and all of the people around him, including the Chief of Staff, that he lost the election. He should have known, like everybody who watched television, everybody in the United States who was around on election day and the days after, know that he lost the election. There's no question about it.
So I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. So that's really the key element in this indictment that's going to come forward now. And by the way, he's been indicted already in New York. Case in New York he's going to have to defend. He's going to be indicted in the next few weeks at Atlanta, Georgia, for the phone call that he made. The evidence is very clear there.
To the Secretary of State that you mentioned.
Right, the Secretary of State. And he made the phone call to the Secretary of State. And he's also been indicted in Florida for the documents issue. So to say that he's in a little bit of trouble is really an understatement. So we'll see what this one could be, the biggest one of them all, this insurrection. And if he's found guilty of that, if he's found guilty of inciting an insurrection, he would not be allowed to hold public office, which means he could never run for president again or do whatever he wants to do. Of course, what he wants to do is he wants to stall all these things as long as possible, run for president, become president, and pardon himself, I guess. We're not 100% sure whether that's constitutional or not, and we haven't reached that point, but I think that's what's in his head.
Okay.
So we'll see what happens.
We'll see. Justice Holmes, I want to go to you because I think you may have you of course wrote the seminal case that stood for I don't know over 50 years in terms of a situation whereby a person creates a problem. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, there are many similarities, although the case involved the Espionage Act and someone speaking in violation of the act or telling people not to serve in World War One. It was by Eugene Debs, who was a pacifist, but he was also the candidate for president of the Socialist Party, and he had run for president before. One of the arguments ex-President Trump or former President Trump's lawyers are making is that you can't have this trial or you can't indict him and bring him to trial because he's running for president and it's political. And historically, we brought Eugene Debs to trial. He was convicted. I heard the appeal and I upheld the conviction, stating the principle that I came up with, clear and present danger. And Eugene Debs was sentenced and he was in prison, and he also ran for president while he was in prison. So there's some similarities here. And the thing we have to look at, and my doctrine of clear and present danger, is basically that former president, well, he was president at the time, but he was creating a clear and present danger by telling people to go to the Capitol, protest an election that most of the evidence says that he knew was legit, and he incited a riot where people lost lives. That's one part of clear and present danger. In addition to that, he attempted through these people to overthrow a fair election and overturn our democracy. Nothing can be more important to keeping a safe country than our democratic institutions being held in high esteem. And we know the influence he had and why it was a clear and present danger, because people that have been convicted of storming the Capitol and of rioting and of violating the Espionage Act, these people said they did it because Donald Trump told them to do it. So if Eugene Debs went to jail and I upheld the conviction for telling people not to register for the draft and not to serve in World War II, then I don't see how former President Trump is not in more jeopardy.
No, I just jumped in just to say it was World War One, but
I'm sorry, you're right. You're right.
No.
If I can interject,
I was a lawyer, not a mathematician.
If I can interject, then for a little bit of an explanation, I think is necessary. The Constitution, the First Amendment to the Constitution, gives everybody the freedom to say whatever they want. It's called freedom of speech. Well, up until the decision that Justice Holmes is talking about, people assumed that everybody had a freedom to say anything that they wanted. Well, he made it clear that that really is not what freedom of speech means. It's not, no freedom is 100%. There's always something, some important thing that can stop you from having the freedom of speech. And one of those things is this clear and present danger. And the way he explained it was that a person can't falsely scream fire in a crowded theater. Well, you know, if you scream fire in a crowded theater, people will get up and scramble and run. And if there's no fire, then your speech, the defense in that case, of course, would be that, well, I have the freedom to say anything I want. But if your speech incites, and it's false, a false premise, and it incites this riot or insurrection, then the freedom of speech has been abrogated, and you don't have the freedom to do that.
that's exactly why the clear and present danger that I ruled on applies to Trump. That's the same thing as yelling fire when there's no fire.
As relates to the screaming of fire in a crowded room, I believe that the case we're talking about with the former president not only reaches that standard, but supersedes it in that he didn't scream fire, he incited people to go set fires, theoretically.
Right.
So it would
Yes.
seem that the and present danger that is represented by Justice Holmes' position is actually superseded in these current set of facts that we're discussing.
Right. And the facts that came out, by the way, in the January 6th investigation was that he knew that the people who were there to hear his speech and support him, that a lot of those people were carrying firearms because they couldn't get through the magnometers because they had firearms on them. So he knew that the crowd was armed. He fired up the crowd with his speech. And by the way, before he spoke, the other speakers, and I think Eastman was there, and I forget who else was, his son, I think, spoke. I mean, they just were firing up this crowd. And when he said, we have to fight and fight like hell, and we're going to march to the Capitol, and I'm going to march with you, well, you saw what happened. And it was that speech lit the match, let's say that. And that's why he's going to, I'm almost positive, he'll be charged with insurrection, inciting an insurrection as part of this indictment.
Well, one of the things that is clear to me is that did not Trump said they're not here to shoot me.
Right. He knew they were there for him.
That's right. And he said, let them through. He actually made the decision that people that were carrying weaponry should be permitted to come into
Absolutely.
to come into the group. And so he knew that there were weapons. He knew when he sent, and in fact, he intended to go with them. I mean, there's been some testimony that he actually had an argument with a Secret Service, his Secret Service contingent, because they wouldn't take him to the Capitol.
Right.
Because his intent was to stop the certification of the electors for Joe Biden. So he was aware. You know, intent.
Absolutely.
Intent is a part of the.
All right, the intent, and it's based on a false premise.
Yes.
The whole thing, the stop the steal, was a false premise because he knew look, I mean, he seems stupid and he seems like he's a moron, but he's not that dumb. And everybody around him, including, I think, his son-in-law and probably his daughter, everybody told him he lost the election. And he knew he lost the election, even though he never said it in public. But he knew it. There was no fraud. The courts all adjudicated that. There was no fraud. And notwithstanding that, he was creating what was actually a coup, because Biden was elected, and he was elected properly, and there was no fraud, and he was going to take over the presidency regardless. So, very, very serious crimes, and I mean, anybody that would be convicted of inciting an insurrection to take over the country, to abrogate all of the laws of the land and the Constitution, is probably the most serious crime you can think of. And by the way, it wasn't just that speech. I mean, he primed this for months before, even before the election. He said, well, Bannon said, well, you know what? If he loses the election, he's going to just say, I won the election. And that's exactly what happened. And they have evidence to prove that. And they have evidence to prove that he was willing to set up these fake electors and all of the states that could swing the election. And he was part and parcel of this whole scheme to overturn a duly elected president.
Now that Justice Marshall, when you talked about morality, this is a clear lack of morality. But I'd like to hear from Justice Scalia, because I'm curious to know where he falls.
Miss Crawford, gentlemen, as you know, I'm so far to the right, I make Barry Goldwater look like a Trotskyist. However, what whatever. However, what Mr. Trump did on January 6th and before and after were totally contemptible. And as a conservative, I believe in order, I believe in structure, I believe in system. And Trump was getting ready to plunge the country into civil war so he can remain in power by utilizing some crackpot legal theory that when I was in the court would never hold water. It was not about advancing the conservative cause. He was only about keeping himself in power. That's it.
Well, that says something coming from you as the arch conservative that you are. But then it does make sense because there's nothing conservative about what happened on January 6th, 2021.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Then let me ask you this, Justice Scalia. Why is it that all of the Republicans in Congress support Trump and support Stop the Steal in light of all of these facts that have come out? Why?
Because they know that the Trump bloc, the Trump's fans are a big voting bloc. They're definitely not the majority, but they're noisy and they're violent and they show up at rallies. And that's what scares the regular Republicans and liberals. Yes, I don't believe that. I'm sorry, I have to say this, but you liberals, I don't think will have the backbone to stand up to Trump and his mob. I mean, they'll run right over you.
Well, you say
take back power.
You say that with such conviction.
It's the truth. I mean, look at the time when, under the Obama administration, the Justice Department said that domestic terrorism on the right was the biggest terrorist threat in the country.
That was Christopher Wray, the FBI.
And the conservative news media, a.k.a. Fox News, excuse me.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. The conservative news media, like Fox News, howled and screamed that their conservatives are going to be oppressed. And the Obama administration retracted its own report. And now it's all too true. We have total complete anti-Semites and neo-Nazis running as Republicans for office. And those I'll have to tell you are the Trump voting base, and Ron DeSantis is trying to cut into that same market. Not very successfully, I might add.
Well, you when you talk about he's not that Trump and the Republicans do not stand for conservative principles. I'm curious in terms of how Justice Marshall would see that, because certainly before he was a justice on the Supreme Court and before he was a solicitor for the United States, he was an advocate, a fierce advocate on behalf of rights, on behalf of people having access to the privileges of this government. So I'm curious to hear what he has to say on your take of the so-called conservatives of today.
In the last episode, I mentioned the moral fabric of the court being frayed, and it is a direct reflection of the fraying of moral fabric throughout the country. There are those who would force their will on others based on their privilege and based on their position. My entire career, legal and otherwise, was dedicated to the fighting against that particular energy.
It's pure and simple crony capitalism, which is fascism. And let's call it what it is so we know. And the former President Trump, he admires fascist leaders. He admires. And recently, his campaign just put out documents saying that if he is elected again, that he would force agencies to have people that were loyal to him and not loyal to the Constitution, that they would break down the FBI, the DOJ. So let's call what the modern Republican Party is. It's a fascist party. And Justice Scalia can say, well, he disagrees and they're not true conservatives, but he mentored Clarence Thomas, who is a fascist judge, in my opinion. He mentored Justice Alito, who came down with decisions that only, I don't even want to use the word, but fascist judges in other eras and other countries would use. So Justice Marshall's a gentleman, I'm not.
Yes, and all you liberals, I mean, you're just too nicey nice, too polite to stand up to the Republican Party as it is now constituted. I mean, they're prepared to play hardball, and you're not. And if you want to keep your movement going, you have to wake up and realize you have to get as down and dirty as they do. But I don't think you can do that.
All right. Final thoughts, Justice Holmes?
Well, I think what our country and the people that are around today are facing is a choice. Do they want authoritarianism, fascism, or do they want Madisonian democracy? And on the one hand, we have people like Justice Marshall in the past and people like President Biden today who do believe in the concept of democracy and equality. And then we have on the right, Donald Trump and his cult followers who believe in fascism. And that's the choice people are going to make in the next presidential election.
Whew. Well, I thank you, guests. This has been a remarkable discussion because it has illuminated what is going on right now and done it from a historical perspective. Irv, any final thoughts?
Well, I never did before, but I tend to agree with Justice Scalia a little bit. I think that the people who believe in democracy do have to stand up and do have to stand up to these conservatives. And the way to do it is to vote. You must vote. That's the power of democracy. And if you vote against autocracy, then all of this will eventually disappear. You must vote. I say it every time.
Every
and it's
time.
the most important thing and what makes us a democracy.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a very spirited and thoughtful discussion. And next week, we will return again to the topic of the Supreme Court, and we will then be discussing, is reform possible? And if reform, what does that look like? So Justices Scalia, Marshall, and Holmes, we look forward to you returning next week so that we can continue our discussion. And thank you so much, Irv. You bring so much information and so much legal expertise to this. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
This has been Conversations Across Time. Please return next week to hear the conclusion. Thank you so much.
Conversations across time. Across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across time.